The house was shrouded in darkness as I entered, the familiar creaks of the floorboards the only sound that broke the silence. I had never been fond of being alone at home, especially at night, but circumstances had conspired to leave me in this unsettling situation. I switched on the lights, their warm glow casting shadows that danced across the walls. The rooms that had once been so inviting now seemed to hold an air of foreboding. As I settled on the couch, I tried to distract myself with the TV, hoping the noise would drown out the unease that had settled over me. But the sound of the TV seemed to amplify the silence, and every noise from outside, the rustling of leaves, the distant hooting of an owl, felt like an intrusion. The longer I sat there, the more the feeling of being watched grew. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something there. I tried to brush off my unease as mere imagination, but as the minutes turned to hours, the feeling only intensified. Every corner of the room seemed to hold secrets, and every shadow seemed to conceal something lurking just beyond sight. I could feel a shiver running down my spine, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and fascination. As I got up to move around, the lights flickered for a brief moment, plunging the room into darkness before returning to normal. My breath caught, and I blinked rapidly, unsure if what I had seen was real or a trick of my mind. The unease that had simmered beneath the surface now boiled over, and I felt a knot of panic forming in my stomach. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping to distract myself with a glass of water. But the gentle tap-tap of water droplets hitting the sink sounded like the distant echo of footsteps. I froze, my ears straining to catch any other sounds. The whisper of wind outside seemed to form words that I couldn't quite decipher, a haunting chorus that sent a chill down my spine. With trembling hands, I turned on all the lights, their combined glow casting a bright, almost blinding illumination. I felt a desperate need to dispel the darkness that seemed to hold an otherworldly presence. I checked every room, every corner, my heart pounding with each step. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the feeling of being watched dissipated. The whispers in the wind ceased, and the air grew lighter. I stood in the midst of my well-lit home, my breaths coming in ragged gasps as I tried to comprehend what had just transpired. As the hours passed and the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the unease that had gripped me slowly faded. The house that had seemed so hostile in the darkness now appeared familiar and safe. But the memory of that night would linger, a reminder that even in the comfort of one's own home, the line between reality and the unknown can be a fragile one. The phone's shrill ring pierced the stillness of the night, and I groaned, reluctantly tearing myself away from the comfort of my bed. Working the late shift at the pizza place was never my favorite, but bills needed to be paid. I grabbed my keys and headed to the car, the cold air biting at my skin. The streets were empty, the city asleep under the cover of darkness. The GPS guided me to an address I had never been to before, an old building tucked away in the heart of a quiet neighborhood. It felt like a place that time had forgotten, its windows dark and its exterior weathered. I parked in front of the building, my headlights casting eerie shadows on the worn pavement. As I grabbed the pizza box, a sense of unease settled over me. The building's silence was oppressive, and an inexplicable feeling of being watched sent shivers down my spine. I hesitated at the entrance, my knuckles hovering over the doorbell. Just as I was about to press it, the door swung open, revealing a figure cloaked in shadows. The man's face was obscured by the hood of his coat, and his eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light. "The pizza," I managed to stammer, holding out the box as if it was a shield. The man's silence sent a chill down my spine, and I could feel his gaze boring into me, as if trying to pierce through to my very soul. Finally, he took the box from my hands, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch sent a jolt of cold energy through me, and I recoiled slightly. As he turned away, a whispered, "Thank you," reached my ears, his voice barely audible over the wind. I watched him disappear into the building, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. The feeling of being watched lingered, and a sense of unease settled over me. I quickly made my way back to the car, my heart racing as I started the engine and pulled away from the building. As I drove back to the pizza place, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that delivery. The man's demeanor, the building's eerie atmosphere, it was all too unsettling. I wanted to brush it off as my imagination, but a voice in the back of my mind urged me to listen to my instincts. I never received another order from that address, and I couldn't find any record of it in the pizza place's database. It was as if the whole thing had been a surreal, one-time occurrence, and yet the memory of that midnight delivery, of the man in the shadows and the sense of being watched, would remain with me, a reminder that even in the ordinary act of delivering a pizza, there could be a world of mystery and the unknown lurking just beneath the surface. The school's corridors were an eerie labyrinth as I walked down them, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. The sun had set, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with each step. It was a place that had once bustled with life, now reduced to an unsettling stillness. I had been staying late to catch up on assignments, my determination to excel blinding me to the fact that the school was now deserted. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh glow creating an otherworldly atmosphere. As I entered the classroom, the door creaked behind me, sealing me in with a sense of foreboding. The silence was oppressive as I sat at my desk, the only sounds being the scratching of my pen and the faint hum of the air conditioning. With each passing minute, the feeling of isolation grew stronger, as if the walls themselves were closing in. A chill ran down my spine, and I looked around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Time seemed to stretch as I worked, the minutes blending into hours. The school's layout had once been familiar, but in the absence of others, it had become a maze of uncertainty. The occasional flicker of a light bulb sent my heart racing, my imagination conjuring images of things that should not exist within these walls. As I finished my last assignment, a sense of relief washed over me. I gathered my belongings and headed for the door, my footsteps echoing loudly in the hallway. But as I turned the corner, I froze. The lights had dimmed, casting the hallway into near darkness. The panic rose within me and I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel eyes on me, an intense gaze that seemed to follow my every movement. The air grew heavy with an energy that I couldn't explain, and I had to fight the urge to look over my shoulder. I reached the main entrance, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the door slightly ajar. I had no memory of leaving it open, and a sense of dread settled in as I realized that I might not be alone after all. The wind outside howled, its mournful cry adding to the tension that hung in the air. Summoning my courage, I pushed the door open, my heart racing as I stepped outside. The night was dark and moonless, the only illumination coming from the distant streetlights. I glanced back at the school, a shiver running down my spine as I saw a figure in the window, a silhouette that seemed to be watching me. My footsteps echoed as I hurried away from the school, the sensation of being followed never leaving me. Every rustling leaf and creaking branch sent my heart into overdrive, my senses heightened by the fear of the unknown. It was as if the presence from within the school had followed me out, refusing to let go. As I reached the safety of my home, I glanced back one final time. The image of the figure in the window burned into my mind. The isolation of the empty school had become a nightmare, a place where the boundaries between reality and the supernatural had blurred. And though I had escaped its clutches, I knew that the memory of that night would forever haunt me, a reminder that even in the silence, we are never truly alone. The highway stretched ahead of me, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the barren landscape. As night fell, I found myself in need of fuel and pulled into a gas station that appeared like an oasis in the darkness. The flickering fluorescent lights bathed the scene in an eerie glow, casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. The air was heavy with an unsettling stillness as I stepped out of the car. The creaking of the rusted sign overhead sent a shiver down my spine. Last chance gas, it read. The paint faded and weathered. I glanced around, feeling a sense of unease as I realized I was the only customer. The station attendant was a gaunt figure, his face half hidden by the hood of his worn-out jacket. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that made me hesitate for a moment, but I pushed aside my unease and approached him. As he filled my tank, his voice was a low murmur, his words barely audible above the hum of the gas pump. "Strange night to be out," he muttered, his gaze fixed on the distance as if searching for something unseen. "Best be on your way before things get worse." I thanked him and headed inside the small convenience store, the door's bell jingling as I entered. The shelves were sparsely stocked, the items coated in a layer of dust. A flickering fluorescent light cast an erratic pattern on the floor, creating a sense of disorientation. I grabbed a few snacks and approached the counter, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't quite explain. The attendant's eyes followed my every move, his demeanor growing more distant as if lost in his own thoughts. I handed him the items and he rang them up without a word. As he handed me my change, his fingers brushed mine, sending a jolt of cold energy through me. I muttered a quick thanks and turned to leave, but as I reached the door I heard a voice, soft and distorted, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Leave before they come." I froze, my heart racing as I looked back at the attendant. His eyes were wide, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. Before I could react, the lights flickered, plunging the store into darkness for a brief moment. When they came back on, the attendant was gone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end and I rushed outside, the convenience store's bell jingling behind me. The gas station was now engulfed in an eerie silence, broken only by the distant howling of the wind. I climbed into my car, my hands trembling as I turned the ignition. As I pulled away from the gas station, a sense of dread lingered. I glanced at my rearview mirror, my heart nearly stopping as I saw figures standing in the distance, shadowy figures that seemed to sway in the wind like specters. The road ahead seemed endless, and with each passing mile, the memory of the desolate gas station haunted me. The attendant's warning echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than I could comprehend. To this day, I can't shake the sense that the gas station was a place out of time, a haven for something beyond the natural world. The image of those figures in the rearview mirror lingers, a reminder that some places are best left unexplored, and some warnings are worth heeding. The graveyard at night was a place that most avoided, a silent expanse of tombstones and shadows that seemed to come alive under the moon's pale light. But curiosity had drawn me there, that insatiable need to confront the unknown that humans often possess. As I walked among the tombstones, the crunch of gravel underfoot was a stark contrast to the silence that enveloped the graveyard. The wind whispered through the trees, creating eerie melodies that sent shivers down my spine. My flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to dance along the ground. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an almost ethereal glow over the tombstones. Each one was a reminder of lives once lived, stories now forgotten. But as I paused to read the inscriptions, a feeling of unease settled over me. It was as if the spirits of the departed were watching, their presence lingering in the air. I moved deeper into the graveyard, my heart pounding in rhythm with the sound of my footsteps. The air grew colder, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. A rustling in the bushes made me start, my flashlight beam trembling as I tried to catch a glimpse of whatever had caused the noise. And then, as I stood frozen, the wind carried a whisper, a voice that seemed to come from all directions at once. I strained my ears trying to make out the words, but they remained just beyond comprehension. My breath caught in my throat as the whispering continued, the words growing louder and more urgent. As I walked among the tombstones, the feeling of being watched intensified. Shadows seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye, and the moonlight took on a sinister quality. I quickened my pace, my heart racing as I searched for the exit, for an escape from the suffocating atmosphere. But the graveyard seemed to stretch on endlessly, the tombstones forming a labyrinth that threatened to trap me within its confines. Panic surged within me as the whispering grew louder, the voices now a cacophony of unintelligible words. I stumbled, my flashlight slipping from my hand and casting the graveyard into darkness, and then, as if in response to the loss of light, the whispering ceased. The silence was deafening, broken only by the pounding of my heart and the sound of my ragged breaths. I fumbled in the darkness, my fingers closing around the cold metal of the flashlight. With a shaky hand I switched it on, the beam revealing the path ahead. I hurried forward, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. Finally, I saw the gates of the graveyard looming in front of me, a small oasis of light in the sea of darkness. As I crossed the threshold, a weight lifted from my shoulders, and the air seemed to grow warmer. I looked back at the graveyard, the tombstones now shrouded in mystery once again. The experience had been a stark reminder that even in the quietest of places, the line between the living and the unknown can blur. A reminder that the echoes of the past can haunt the present, and that the whispers among the tombstones hold secrets that may never be fully understood.